Let's dive in. God's promise to Abraham and the birth of Ishmael. Hey there. Welcome back to Daily Bible Devotional. You've been sticking with us, and I think you're in for something special today. We're going to dive into Genesis 15 to 16, where God makes a huge promise to Abraham, a promise that shifts everything. And trust me, it's not just an ancient story, it's one that can hit home in our lives right now. In this episode, we're talking about God's covenant with Abraham and the birth of Ishmael. I know it sounds like ancient history, but stay with me. There's so much we can apply to our own lives from these chapters. It's about waiting on God's promises and how sometimes our own impatience can take us down a detour. Before we jump into that, though, let's quickly catch up from where we left off last time. In our last episode, we walked through Genesis 14 and saw Abraham in action, rescuing his nephew Lot and meeting Melchizedek. It was a powerful story showing Abraham's faith and leadership. But today we're stepping into something even bigger, God's promise to Abraham. So let's break it down and see how it all fits together. God's promise to Abraham, a pact that changes everything. In Genesis 15, Abraham is in a place of doubt. He's waiting for God to fulfill the promise of descendants, but nothing is happening. And honestly, how many of us can relate to that? God promises us something, and we wait and wait, but it feels like it's taking forever. Abraham asked God, "What's the deal? I don't even have a son. How will all these promises come true?" And God, in His grace, doesn't scold him. Instead, He reassures Abraham with an incredibly vivid promise. In Genesis 15:5, God says, "Look up at the sky and count the stars, if indeed you can count them. So shall your offspring be." Can you imagine standing there, looking up at the stars, and hearing God say that your descendants will be more numerous than the stars you see? It's such a powerful image, one that really sticks with you. I mean, how many of us, when we're facing uncertainty, just need a reminder that God's promises are bigger than our doubts? Abraham's faith was tested in that moment, but he believed God, and that faith was credited to him as righteousness. Genesis 15:6. Now this is where it gets even more amazing. God doesn't just say, "I promise." He actually makes a covenant with Abraham. He tells Abraham to prepare a sacrifice, a calf, a goat, a ram, and some birds. This was the way people back then made covenants. It was like saying, "May this happen to me if I break my promise." And as Abraham waits, God's presence moves through the pieces of the sacrifice. It's like a scene straight out of a movie. But here's the thing. God's promise to Abraham wasn't just about Abraham's descendants becoming a great nation. It was about God's big picture plan for all of humanity. Through Abraham, God was going to bring about a blessing for the entire world. And that's where it gets personal, because through Abraham's line, Jesus would eventually come into the world. The waiting game, where faith meets impatience. But even after this dramatic moment of reassurance, Abraham's journey of faith isn't smooth sailing. In Genesis 16, we see Abraham and Sarah take matters into their own hands. Sarah, who is still childless, comes up with a plan. She tells Abraham to have a child with her servant, Hagar, because she's convinced that God's promise won't come true through her. And honestly, that's where we find a lot of us, isn't it? We know God has a plan, but sometimes it feels like it's taking too long. We start looking for shortcuts, trying to force things to happen on our own. Abraham and Sarah's story is a reminder that God's timing is perfect, even when it seems like nothing is happening. Abraham listens to Sarah, and Hagar becomes pregnant with a son, Ishmael. But things don't go as planned. The relationship between Sarah and Hagar becomes tense, and Hagar flees into the wilderness. This part of the story is heavy with lessons. It's a stark reminder that when we try to take control of things that are meant for God to handle, we end up in messes we can't clean up on our own. Here's where the deeper message comes in. God shows up even in their mistakes. Even though Abraham and Sarah went off script, God still has a plan for them. Hagar too receives a promise about her son, Ishmael. God is faithful even when we get impatient or try to rush things ourselves. Lessons from the story: faith, impatience, and God's redeeming grace. What can we learn from this? First, the idea of God's covenant, His promises, teaches us about God's faithfulness. His promises are not based on our ability to keep them, but on His. Abraham couldn't make the promise happen by himself. It was always God's doing. Second, we're reminded that waiting on God isn't passive. It requires trust, patience, and sometimes a whole lot of letting go. Abraham's waiting was filled with doubt, but his trust in God's promise is what eventually made him the father of nations. And finally, when we try to rush things or take matters into our own hands, we often end up with consequences. It's a painful lesson that Abraham and Sarah learned the hard way, but it's one we can learn from today. We might not always understand God's timing, but we can rest in knowing that He is working behind the scenes in ways we can't always see. The story doesn't end here. As we wrap up today, I want you to take a moment and reflect on your own life. Think about that one thing you've been waiting on. It could be a promise from God, something deep in your heart that you believe He's spoken to you. But right now, it feels like nothing's happening. The years have gone by, the prayers seem unanswered, and you're standing at the edge of your own patience, wondering if God has forgotten about you. Or maybe you're in that place where you feel the pressure to make things happen yourself. It's easy to get to that point, isn't it? The world around you is moving, people are succeeding, and you're stuck waiting. You might even feel like you've been waiting for so long that it's time to take matters into your own hands, just like Abraham and Sarah did. Maybe you've tried to speed up the process, take any shortcut, or made a decision that wasn't part of the plan, just to feel like you're moving forward. But here's what we can learn from today's story. Just like with Abraham, God's promises are never about our ability to make them come true. They are always about His faithfulness. Abraham didn't have to build the future God promised. He just had to believe that God was able to bring it to life, even when he couldn't see how. It's the same for us today. I know waiting is hard. I know it feels like the clock is ticking and the answer is just out of reach. But hear this, even in the waiting room, God is still working. His timing might not be your timing, but it's always better. What you think is a delay could be God's divine preparation. What looks like a closed door might actually be Him setting up the perfect moment to reveal His promise in ways you couldn't even imagine. Trusting God means trusting His timing, even when we don't understand it. And next time, we're going to dive even deeper into how God continues His plan with Abraham, and how this story connects to us today in ways we might not expect. You don't want to miss it. So as you walk through your own season of waiting, remember this: God's promises are always bigger than our doubts. His timing is always better than our plans. Let's keep holding on to that truth, no matter where we find ourselves. Thanks for tuning in. Be sure to join us every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday for more insights into the Old Testament. And don't forget, our New Testament series airs every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. Catch you next time.